I'd like to start by acknowledging the land I'm on, actually, and whose land this actually is, right? And that I'm a descendant of a colonizing group. The ancestral Pueblo people had this land for millennia, and I need to let them in this room. I need to let the spirits of those ancestors in here. I need to also acknowledge the heartbreak I have and that I carry as a person that works with the land and with the people and the plants over what's befalling the earth at the hands of my kind, right? And my part in that. And I feel like I would be untrue to my relationships if I didn't acknowledge our impact on plants and all of the other than human beings and the original inhabitants. So that's in the room with me. That's in this place. That's on this landscape with me. Well, I didn't have really an education in plants or certainly even an aliveness of nature. But what I did have that served me well was an outrageously unfortunate childhood. And I had the great good fortune to take refuge in the forest. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and literally that's where I was safe, amongst the trees and the ferns and the moss. And that's where I think I had a healthy reflection of myself. That's where I had a place to dream. That's where I had a place for the imaginal to come alive. And then, I went forward in my life, and as the gods would have it, I found myself in the healing arts and studying science and anatomy and neurology and, fill in the blank, chemistry, biochemistry. And somewhere in there, I began to get interested in herbs and plant medicine, right? And I was at a traditional Sundance. I had a friend who was a Sundance priest in training. He worked at the same office I did at the same clinic, and he invited me, which was an honor. And while I was there, because of my background and his, we got invited to come over and help doctor a woman who needed help. But on the way there, he said, we got to get my uncle, right? He's a medicine person. And we got this guy, and here's this class. This was in Western Oklahoma, and here's this just kind of classic guy with cowboy boots and jeans and a white T-shirt and a hat, and Native American, and he's got a pack of cigarettes rolled up in the sleeve of his T-shirt. And my friend said, "Uncle, did you bring your herbs?" And the old man said, "Of course I brought my herbs," right? And I'm looking at him, and he's got no bag, no satchel, no nothing, right? And I'm thinking, I don't know, we'll see what happens here. And we went over to this family's camp, and this woman was laying on the ground with a blanket, and he started talking to her in their language, and which I was unaware of. And then when he finished his conversation, he reached under that T-shirt and he pulled out a piece of string that he had tied around his neck, right? And along the string at little intervals were tiny pieces of roots, different plants, right? And he sorted through his medicines, right? And he found the one he wanted, and he scraped it on his tooth like that. And then he salivated on it real good. And he laid hands on this woman, right? And my whole world changed in that moment, as a young herbalist. He didn't say a word to me. And like some of our best teachers, that's how it goes, isn't it? They embody something. They embody a relationship. They're living something. and we're graced to be in their presence, right? And that experience entered me, right? And unfolded, I think, over many years. But within it, for me, is that lesson that, and this is my interpretation, okay? But it's like, there's that moment of phytochemistry, just that hint of phytochemistry that I see as kind of the key that enters this lock, right? And that lock unfolds the relationship he has with that plant, right? So his nervous system's involved, his sensory apparatus is involved, but his spiritual relationship with that plant is involved. He has a relationship, but it starts right there, doesn't it? That taste, that phytochemistry. To share about plants is sometimes to just say, in a way, all they're saying always is that it's alive, right? It's alive, it's all alive. And I can remember my first moments when I really was crossing that threshold from, kind of a Western allopathic based practitioner into that green world. At first, and I'm sure you know this, it's almost utterly overwhelming, because you suddenly realize that we're this one little arrogant upstart species, and we're surrounded by this vibrant, alive, interactive matrix of life that's been here for hundreds of millions of years. And we've been lost in our thoughts, right? We've been lost in this misguided sense of superiority, and this way that has unfortunately led us to a profound sense of separation, right? In a sense, we need to honor the contemporary findings of botany and phytochemistry. We need to honor the folklore and traditional usage of medicinal plants. We need to honor the indigenous teachings of plants. But there's this other section of that wheel that involves the dreaming place. It involves that place we call spirits. It involves that place where suddenly, we find ourselves touched and moved by our encounter with a plant, by an other than human part of the natural world. And that's, for me anyway, that's where that aliveness enters that wheel. That's like the motor of that whole wheel that drives it. And then when we enter the green world with that foot that this is alive, with that foot that these are my elders, right? How do I humble myself? How do I humble myself, right? I remember the first encounter I had with we call it a plant spirit, for lack of a better word. I'd been working with plants for some time and working in this way and trying to learn and listen, because most of it is listening, right? How do we really listen? And I had the good fortune, I was traveling at that time from New Mexico, but I would go to the East Coast and work in Boston. And I'd work in a little place up the coast on clients. And this one house I got to work on was the home of this beautiful elderly woman, and it was a garden. Only what was incredible about this old lady, it was overlooking the ocean, is hers was the wild garden. I mean, there were no fences, there were no, it was, she had spent her life just like putting plants everywhere, right? And I'll never forget, because I got there late at night, her daughter drove me up, and I got out of the car, and unbidden, I dropped to my knees. I had no idea what the place even looked like. It was late at night, and the presence of those plants was so strong, I literally hit the ground. And in that very young way, I all I knew to do was introduce myself. I knew I needed to say who I was if I was going to have the arrogance to imagine I could do healing work where these beings lived, right? And there was a plant there that I was really interested in, and she let me dig up. It's a rhizome, and I brought it home to New Mexico, and I was going to plant it and transplant it in a very foreign land. And it was sitting there in this box, and my partner at the time, very spookily intuitive, she kept saying, would you please deal with that plant? It's awfully loud in that box. And so finally, okay. And I sat down on the floor and I pulled this plant out, and I just, in my own way, I started trying to talk to it and say, I really, I brought you here. I want to work with you. And all of a sudden, this presence arrived in the room, unlike anything I'd ever experienced, right? And to be honest, I was frightened, like, what have I done, right? Here it is. And I'll never forget it, because I'm going to call it a he. It felt something like masculine. But he said, I'll work with you on one condition. And I kind of, in that moment, I remember I panicked and I thought, what have I gotten myself into here? This thing's going to cut a deal with me. I said, what's the condition? And he said, you can never limit me to what some man wrote about me in a book. You can never limit me to what some man wrote about me in a book. And that's that place with that root. That's that, right? A lot of people, I think, they get interested, right, in plants, and I'm thrilled when they do. But I think we have to be careful culturally, right? That, again, how we enter that. I think that we have to enter that world with a sincerity. I think we have to enter that world, in a sense, on our knees. We have to enter that world with a broken heart, right? We have to enter it owning who we are and what we've done. And I don't mean guilt. I mean our part in it. And I think we need to open it also with an incredible eye for beauty, right? So that heart opens fully, right? Because it's only as it opens fully that can enter us, right? That then that world, that living world of nature, can inform us. And by inform, I mean it changes literally our form, right? It changes our nervous system. It changes how we function. It changes how we process information. So I know you asked me at one point, what would be my future hope for a relationship here? It would be that we're willing to let our hearts break open wide enough, that we're willing to listen. We're willing to stop what we're doing, that we're willing to let that intelligence that lives there, that intelligence that has realized itself as bark and leaf and needle and root, that we can let that thing actually touch us in a way that rewires us, in a way that brings us into relationship. Probably my main way has been sweat lodge. I've had the great good fortune just to stumble into sweat lodges, to be honest. I just found myself in one a long, long time ago, back in the 80s. And I'll remember the first time I walked in a lodge, crawled in a lodge, I felt at home. I felt like, oh, this is it, right? It's dark, you're in the dirt, right? I mean, yeah. And that's been the place that all my work with plants is hinged around, because the people that adopted me into their tribe, gave me that way, but they said, you have to find your own way with it. You can't do it the way we do it, because you're not one of us, but you're our brother, you're a medicine person. We want you to do it, but find your own way, right? So in their words, they said, we're going to unlock it for you. We're going to turn it on. Here, what are you going to do? So what I did and still do is I bring plants in there, right? And the way I work with plants in there is I'll make decoctions of plants and I'll pour them on the rocks and sit by myself, but usually with others in stillness and listen, right? And listen. There's been plants, and often I don't call plants by their botanical names. I call them, I don't know, by the plant, their nicknames, I guess. They're affectionate names. They're names that arise from the relationship, right? So there's a plant I call reaching root. And I think it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years into sitting with that plant that all of a sudden I'm in there and I realized as my whole system opened, as I started to understand, I realized, oh my God, this plant's been working on me for 4 years to get me to a place where I could have the conversation, right? That's where we're coming from, right? And the funny thing is it's who we are, it's our inheritance, it's in our very design. And yet we have to invert culture in a way. We have to step back away from our acculturation, away from language, so that we can actually hear what they have to say. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that if you want to enter that world, right, you have to come from here. You have to come from the heart. You have to come from a willingness to peel away so much of your conditioning and your acculturation. You have to be willing to listen to the stillness. Douglas fir is a hallmark tree out here, and one that's being ravaged by climate change, actually. I think we've got pushing a 60% loss right now on the mountain. And it breaks my heart, right, to think that my granddaughter, when she's my age, there's predicted to be not any more of the old ones left, right? Because to be honest, I go to that tree every time I'm on that mountain. And I go because that tree can measure who I am with an honesty that my human friends don't have. But you know, when I remember on my 60th birthday, I was talking to him and I was weeping and I was saying, my granddaughter won't get to do this. And he said, I understand your broken heart. But he said, we don't grieve. He said, we're rooted in the eternal. He said, we've known the dragon's coming for a long time. We rest there. That helps. I still grieve, right? It's that broken heart that lets me hear him, right? So yeah, how you enter that world, how you listen. Are you willing to not only digest the plant, but let the plant digest you? Are you willing to not rush to get a verbal message? I don't think it works like that. I think it takes time. But I do think that in this state that we find ourselves, in this present state where I believe, and these are my words, I believe that the world's unraveling, right? And it needs to. But I've also been shown real clearly by the plants that she's birthing a new world, right? That they're both taking place. And plants have a role in that, and plants are willing to reach for us, right? And they are. And we just have to humble ourselves and reach out towards them as well.